what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh. Leadership GPS. Insightful conversations about leadership and what it takes to be successful in today's rapidly changing organizations.
Hello and welcome to Leadership GPS. This is the show here on The Mesh where we talk about leadership styles, leadership practices, helpful information for those either in leadership positions or maybe some of you that are hoping to aspire for leadership positions in the future. I'm Alan Jackson with the Jackson Group. With me, as always, Tony Jackson, father, mentor, my own personal leader. How you doing, Dad?
I'm fine after hearing that. That's great.
Yeah, see, I'll fluff you up a little bit here.
Have you?
No, it's good. And we're just here to talk about some leadership practices and styles that we've come into contact with. You know, Tony, my father here does a lot of leadership development, coaching, training, and helping people elevate their leadership styles and some of their leadership roles within the organization. So what we're here to talk about is getting some advice and information and topics for discussion for those looking to elevate their own role in an organization, to grow into more of a leadership role or position, or if you're already in a leadership role, maybe you're just looking for some advice or help in managing that tricky world of leadership that we all sometimes have to face. We've talked about some topics in the past, such as communication styles. We've talked about the hardships of leadership and some of the difficult things we have to deal with. And today's, I think, is also one of those difficult topics, Dad, that is tough for a lot of people. I think many people wrestle with it. It's the idea of constructive criticism, the idea of giving some thoughts and opinions back to somebody about how they're doing something wrong, but trying to do it in a very constructive, positive way. So we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of constructive criticism.
Well, let me kind of change the wording on that for you.
Oh, you're going to change the wording on the whole
topic.
episode?
Is that okay?
Wow.
Yeah,
oh,
is that
sure.
right? I mean, because part of the problem and why this is difficult for people is that we do use the word criticism.
Okay.
Criticism is never heard as positive. I mean, there's just no way for people to put out criticism of anything and for people to jump up and down with it and say, man, that's great. Thanks for being critical of what I just did.
Well, it's got the core word of critic in it right away. Yeah. That almost implies that I'm going to knock you down. I'm going to pick you apart.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And so how about we think about constructive feedback?
Ooh,
Okay?
I like that better.
You do?
Yes,
right.
I do. So constructive feedback is what we're really talking about.
That's right. Because feedback is nothing more than reflecting back to the person what they've already done, said, been involved with, or whatever it is. It's like a mirror. It's like an echo. You know, you don't initiate anything. You don't come up with anything that the person's not expecting or doesn't already know has happened. You're just reflecting it back to them through a different way of looking at it. Think about, we're in an audio studio here. So what happens, what's this term that audio people use when there's feedback, microphone feedback? What's that mean?
Feedback means you're getting some of the audio back to you, and it's kind of it's a little overpowering at times. It can be loud, piercing type of thing.
Right, right. But it is getting back rather than creating anything new, right?
That's correct. It's not creating new sound. It's taking sound that's already been generated and pushing it back to you.
Yeah. And I think that's the best thing we can look at here. What we're talking about in order to be constructive in our feedback process is to stop thinking of it as being critical.
Okay.
Right. Think it is giving back to the person what they've already done.
Well, because, and it's true because when you hear the term constructive criticism, there again, the implication is that you're going to hear something negative. Mm-hmm. It may be presented to you in a very productive way, but it's still something negative that you're doing wrong.
Yep.
Where really we need to be focusing more on both good and bad things that we're feeding back. Constructive feedback can be feedback on things that you're doing positively that you can maybe even work on doing better and other things like that.
That's exactly right.
It's not always picking apart critical things that you're doing wrong.
Or if a person's on a path toward being successful at what they do, but there's a little bit of a detour because of something to do or how they do it, this is kind of mid-course correction. Mm-hmm. It's making them aware of what they're doing or not doing that's good or not so good based on where they want to get to, on their pathway there.
So if we're going to use the term constructive feedback, and you answered a little bit of this question already, but so why is this such a necessary tool? Why is this such a necessary thing for anybody in a leadership role to be able to do, to know how to do? If you say
leader,
well?
Again, I'm going to change your language just for a moment. Let me talk about the manager person and why it's needing to be done and why it's mandatory that it be done there. The manager, remember what we talked about before. There's a difference between being a manager and a leader. Sure, the same person can be both. There's no doubt about that. Or he can be one or the other. But a manager manages things and processes, whereas a leader leads people. Okay? Now keep that in mind.
Got it.
If you think about then constructive feedback for the manager, a manager is required to give feedback to people that are working towards those things that need to be accomplished in the organization. So they have to provide the mid-course correction. They're legitimately the role person that says, this is not right, do it this way. Gee, you stepped off the line there, let's get back on track with this. Or are you aware you're doing such and such, here's a different way to do this. They have to do that because their end objective is not being reached otherwise through the people who are the productive resources.
Okay.
The difference for a leader, though, is a leader really wants to give feedback to be a help, to help the person be successful. It's a matter of approach and intent. All right. The manager says, you need to hear this because otherwise we're not getting to where we need to be.
Right.
With your behaviors or whatever it might be. The leader says, I want you to be successful. And to do that, we need to talk about this one thing that's getting in the way.
So what I'm almost hearing here is then that people who are just strictly managers and they're not really that focused or concerned about the growth and development of that employee, they're probably going to be a little more resistant in general to giving that constructive feedback because if they're not driven to want to see that employee grow, there's no real reason to do it.
Well, the motives aren't there as well.
They can fill out their performance review form and just file it away, and that's all I have to do. Leaders are the ones that say, you know what, maybe they're going to be less resistant to the idea of wanting to give constructive feedback because they honestly want to see those employees grow and develop.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the performance evaluation process that a lot of organizations use and some have to use.
Right.
And, those started out years and years ago, back in the 1800s, as a very tangible way of recording feedback to people that do work for us.
Okay.
All right. And I have to tell you, I think the most humorous, but also one of the most enlightening examples, one of the first recorded types of evaluations, came from the mid-1800s from a cavalry officer in the Southwest. And evidently, and this has been found in the archives wherever, so I'm kind of making this part up, but it's out there somewhere.
Sure. Creative license.
That's
okay.
right.
Yeah.
They found this write-up and evaluation that a captain did of his lieutenant. And in the write-up, it says, Lieutenant Jones has never made the same mistake twice. And then ... But I'm quite sure he's made every mistake at least once. Sometimes we feel that in the art of giving feedback, we aren't comfortable just being critical and corrective. We have to also lace it with some positives somewhere along the line. Never made the same mistake, but.
Right.
Let me tell you another example of that. Not related to an evaluation. I'll get back to that in a moment. But just recently, in our own company, another consultant and I were talking about a feedback process, and she indicated that she had advised somebody to use the Oreo approach, like an Oreo cookie, 3 parts.
Okay.
All right. One side, the meat or the juicy part, and then the other side. Now, this is appropriate since, Oreo had their 100th anniversary this week.
Did they really?
Yeah, they did.
Oh, you're being very
it's a major
timely
event.
and topical then. So,
Alan, that's a major event. You should never have overlooked that.
See, I eat Oreos every day, so I don't really know when no, I don't really.
I know.
So I don't really know when to celebrate more.
But your boys, I know how to twist them apart and rake off the good feeling with their teeth and all that sort of stuff and dip it in milk.
We may have to celebrate this weekend just to make up for that.
I understand. Okay.
Sure.
Anyway, she advised this person to use the Oreo approach in giving feedback, which basically is also called a sandwich approach to giving feedback to people.
Okay.
And I have a problem with this because it means that the one side, you start off by giving something positive, then slap the meat to it or the juicy stuff in the middle, the real,
by the juicy
part.
stuff, you're meaning the tougher, the more critical part.
Yeah, the actual meat of what you're trying to get across. And then you close it off with something positive again. Yeah. I don't like that, Alan. I mean, it's useful, but it's usually useful to getting yourself out of a hole and making you feel better about giving the feedback. I'm a strong advocate of simply saying, look, I want you to be successful, and there's something getting your way right now, and here's what it is.
Okay.
All right? Get right to the point. And because otherwise, suppose that I were evaluating you right now or giving you some constructive feedback, I thought, and I started off by saying, Alan, I want to sit down with you for a few minutes and talk to you about just how well you're doing in our company. And I mean, I'm just very impressed with your approach to things, your entrepreneurial spirit, and how you communicate with people and those types of things. And
But I hear a butt coming.
Do you really? It's that thump, thump,
Yep,
thump, thump.
I do.
Here comes
I
the
hear
butt.
it.
Yeah.
Here comes the butt.
That's right. And that's exactly what happens. People feel they're being set up. They keep waiting for the axe to fall, the butt to come in there, or the however. And so starting off positive usually only makes the person giving the feedback feel a little bit softer about it.
Right.
I'm much more in favor of simply saying, look, I need to talk to you.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you because you're a friend. I want to talk to you because you're a colleague. I want to talk to you because they're a person I care about. I want to talk to you because I want you to be successful. I want to come at from that standpoint and then say, here's something I want you to hear from me. This is getting in your way right now. This is a bugaboo.
See, and I would just, I think somebody would appreciate that so much more because it's honest, it's candid, and it really does feel like it's not trying to fit into some sort of formula that person is being going through on a discussion like that.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I like the framing too of I want you to be successful. So here's what we're going to talk about that you can do. People want to hear that because you can't. I can't imagine anybody would say, "Well, I don't want to be successful, so I don't want to hear this."
Right.
I mean, they are going to say, "Oh, please tell me because I want to hear this kind of feedback."
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's a great way to start any type of feedback process. And I want you to be successful. And here's some things that you need to continue doing that are working well for you, or here's some things that are getting your way right now, stumbling blocks.
So why? And I'm throwing you a softball here. So this is an easy question.
I can use one like that. Okay.
But why is it necessary for anybody, manager, leader, whatever the role being, to give this constructive feedback on a more regular basis, on a more as needed basis, as opposed to, well, I'm just going to wait for their performance review to come around a year from now or 9 months from now and just fill out their form and give it to them. Why is this process of just feedback when feedback is needed so important for a good leader?
I don't know.
Okay, well, moving on.
Well, it's an easy one, but it's an easy one to answer, but it's not an easy one to do in practice.
Yeah.
And here's several reasons. We have dug our own hole when it comes to giving constructive feedback to people in organizations. Leader or manager doesn't matter. Part of our obligation, and I'll put it that way rather than role, our obligation to the people we really care about and want to be successful or are charged with helping them be successful as a manager is to give them feedback.
Right.
We have dug our own hole because we have in so many organizations relegated the feedback process to a concise, neat little package once a year, okay, called the annual evaluation. I've seen organizations try to do annual evaluations 4 times a year, so quarterly evaluations, I guess, in a formal sense. Same effect. It's a quarterly event to get over and done with. I read an evaluation just recently. The vice president of HR in an organization I work with said, let me show you something. And he pulled out, and I had to agree to confidentiality, but he showed me this person's record about an evaluation that was filed on this person. And the write-up section, all the check marks were in the left-hand column, which is the strongest column, except one, because I think they felt guilty about not having something negative.
Well, there's those times where you don't want to give everything positive, so you got to find something to knock them out with a little bit, right?
Anyway, they're all down that mostly the left side, and then in the write-up block below, it was nice, flowery written and very positive, very typically kind of specific, which we like to see, but very glowing type of testimonial to the person.
Okay.
All right. Not as specific as like, but there. I said, okay, this could be improved at such and such, and it raised some question about being too positive, but, okay, what's your point? And show me this. He said, well, let me show you one from the year before. All right, the year before.
Right.
Brought the same person's evaluation form from the year before, compared the two side by side, and they were identical. Even to the verbiage in the write-up box. Verbatim, word for word, same stuff, except at the very end of that little block, the person says, and this person continues to do well. That's all it said. And it continued like that. And what it was a very demonstrative example of that a lot of managers, particularly, I think manager would be more appropriate there, see a feedback process as being relegated to the once-a-year evaluation and an event to get over and done with.
Yep.
All right. If I can copy what I did before and say, well, you're still on track, Alan, no problem.
Well,
that's not it.
I mean, why do some people resist giving more constant feedback and more engaging feedback as opposed to the form? I mean, is it a uncomfortableness? Is it a time issue?
It's both of those. It's at least two and maybe three things. All right, but the third one's probably related to the first one. There is some discomfort all the time. And what's the discomfort come from? Well, discomfort can come from, I don't know how to say this to the person and how them not be offended by it.
Well, a danger of offending.
That's right, danger of offending. Yeah. It could be, and maybe this is the third thing I was thinking about a moment ago, but it could be that there's discomfort because it sounds like we're over you and I know how to do things, so I'm going to tell you. I'm going to be instructive.
Kind of pulling rank a little bit.
Almost as though the person could turn around and say, wait a minute, I've seen you do worse. Or, who are you to be giving me this type of feedback?
That's right.
Right?
Sure.
So I think those two things cause discomfort. The third point of discomfort could be that this person just simply doesn't know how to skillfully give feedback to people. And there's an art to that.
Sure.
Okay. But why else wouldn't they do this? Well, maybe there's another reason to, and that's time. The thing I see being the biggest hindrance of people doing routine, regular, and I won't say routine, as needed, on the spot feedback throughout the year rather than just waiting to an evaluation is a time constraint. I've often told people this, and when we do employee surveys, Alan, in organizations. One of the things that people relate to most frequently as being less frequently done than they need is feedback about their performance, coaching about growth opportunities, constructive but also positive feedback to people and that type of thing.
Sure.
They score those things lower. Is this being done? Well, not as much as we think. And even though all the other scores may be glowing, those things are less done. But, when we do a little study, an intuitive study, and ask the organization, well, how's business and how's things going? Oh, we're so busy. We're so pushed, such and such and such and such. Leaders and the manager's bar has been elevated. And you know what? To remind people to say, you know what? Take time to dialogue with your folks one-to-one about how they're doing.
It's tough.
Yeah.
It really
just
is.
means I've got to take time to do that too.
That's right.
And you get the roll of the eyes and, oh my gosh, and that type of thing. So I think there's a natural barrier, natural hindrance. That's why I think the leader in a person has to be the one to step back and say, despite the lack of time, despite my discomfort or perhaps lack of skill, I want to do this because it's helping that person be successful.
Well, and I can almost argue too that to me, the time issue is probably the core root because even those people that are uncomfortable giving that kind of feedback, if they had the time available to make themselves start giving more feedback, they would become more comfortable with it over time. I think in a way, sometimes it's that whole hindrance of, well, I'm not comfortable doing it and I don't have the time. So because of that, I'm not going to go talk to that person or I'm not going to do this.
Sure.
When sometimes it's just you got to force yourself to get into a schedule of saying, you know what, this week I've got to go talk to these individuals and spend some time with them and give them some feedback. The more I get in a routine of doing that, it does become part of my normal routine to do this.
I agree.
I get more comfortable with it.
It's like rounding. People have to remind themselves to round. I worked with a senior vice president one time in Oklahoma City who was a very introverted person. So introverted. It was just painful to try to talk with him or listen to him if he decided to talk. And he was concerned about that because everybody in the organization would always mark him down on surveys about inaccessibility, lack of visibility, that type of thing. Right. Hard to get to know him. So we said, look, this is where you go against the grain. Sometimes you got to structure ways to be more visible in the organization, in his case. So we said, look, never invite a manager or director anymore to come to your office to meet with you as a senior vice president. Call them up and say, can I stop by and talk to you for a few minutes? But on your way there, go one route there through the organization, take another route back. Sure. Just a very mechanical, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it that way, accomplished a number of things. First of all, the vice president called me up later on and he said, you won't believe what a difference this has made. He said, I don't get those markdowns anymore about visibility or lack of visibility. He said, you can't believe the number of people that won't stop and talk. Yep. So he was just very impressed at just by tweaking a little bit of his routine and deciding to do something differently, accomplish a number of objectives about visibility, accessibility, responsiveness, and that type of thing.
Well, it really is in that situation, it was putting a process on something that even though we were kind of advocating early on not to make this kind of performance feedback a process, but yet if that's something that works better for you to say, I need to get myself in a routine, as long as that routine doesn't come across to the employees as I'm here to do my daily round and I'm here to check off the list. And
Absolutely.
I'm here. It needs to be still natural, but yet if it needs to be in a process for yourself to guide yourself, I think that's okay.
And that's a subtle, yeah, exactly right. You're right on target. And to prove the point, I'm going to give you another example. Okay, I love stories anyway, but one of the first hospitals I worked with organizations I ever worked with, the CEO had feedback from his managers and employees about we never see him.
Right.
He's up in his office the whole time. We just never see him. There's a gap between employees and senior leadership and all that. And he got a little fed up with it. He said, okay, all right, I'm going to do this. He said, I've got a problem doing this, but I'm going to set it up so I can be more visible. Every Friday from 4 to 5 o'clock, for an hour for the next 6 weeks, I'm going to be in the cafeteria in the back corner over there. If you want to come and see me, come on down and see me. And then in the first week, he called me up on the phone. He said, Tony, I knew this wouldn't work. I was there for an hour, actually a little bit more than an hour, and one person came by, stuck his head in the door and said, I just want to see if he was here, and then left. He said, I'm not doing this anymore. Well, that was so artificial. I mean, so unlike the guy in Oklahoma, that was kind of blended into what he should be doing anyway.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the key point, though. Let's not forget the fact that ongoing feedback, constructive feedback, can be positive or negative, but it doesn't have to be an event.
Right.
Walking and talking to a person and coming in and saying, oh, man, look, that's great work. Somebody working on a new design said, man, that's looking sharp. That's good. That's constructive feedback. Of course, what you're doing is reinforcing something that the person is working on. You're doing it right, in other words. Continue doing it right.
Well, there's two values to that as well. I mean, one, if it's part of some sort of formal routine where I'm going to give this person feedback, but I'm only going to do it every 6 months at the certain meeting we have, there's a lot of gap of time there that you sometimes have to fill where if somebody's doing something that's not helping the organization as much, that could go on for 5 or 6 months.
You need to stop
before
that
you talk
process.
About it.
That's
exactly.
Right. You need to interrupt it somewhere along the line.
And then two, you also build up some anxiety for some of your employees if you say, all right, 3 weeks from tomorrow, we're going to sit down and I'm going to give you some feedback. All of a sudden for the next 3 weeks,
oh my God.
What does that mean? I don't know what I'm going to. I like the idea of more of a stopping in, dropping in. How you doing?
Impromptu.
I want to give you some feedback on a couple things I noticed that I think might help you out a little bit or help the organization a bit.
Or not even say I want to give you some feedback, because then the antenna go up. But you can say, suppose that you pass a graphic designer's workstation. You look and see something really starkly good that they've done.
Right.
Complimenting and saying, man, and use a person's name, personalize it. Say, Jim, that looks dazzling. That is great. That's going to pop out to people.
Sure.
Good stuff.
Okay.
Great work. He feels great about that.
Absolutely.
Great felt about because I did it right. And it's encouraged to continue that line of design. But suppose that you came by the same workstation with Jim again on another day. He's working on a different project.
And it looks pretty bad.
It just didn't grab you. It just, you could tell he's rushed through that design or whatever.
Yeah. All right. So
rather than sitting there and you don't come out and say, Jim, boy, you screwed that up.
What are you doing?
That's right. What's on your mind? But you can't come and say, that doesn't look like your normal quality of work. Have you thought about such and such? Okay. Or if it's just a little minor tweaking and all that, say, I think that's a good start. But my first look at it, it doesn't grab me.
Yeah.
Have you thought about maybe doing such and such and such and such? Okay.
So both times you're not telling somebody their work is bad.
No.
You're saying to them, I like the phrase, actually, this doesn't appear to be up to your standard of quality. Well, what that means is they have a high standard of quality, which ought to be
which is already a positive reinforcement.
That's right. It's just saying this one particular example, you're not matching it.
Yep.
I think people are going to respond to that a lot better as opposed to, ooh, I don't like that at all. I don't know what you're doing there. That's just not going to work as well. So you're not flowering it up. You're not being condescending. You're basically saying, I know you're capable of good work. Then this example, I don't think you're meeting your normal standards. So that's okay.
That's right. Sometimes you can be very direct. Suppose a person is making a presentation and they're talking about really good stuff. Good stuff's been done.
Right.
But they get, they get off target, or they ramble, or they can't form all their words quite right, and people start noticing that more than the message you're sending out to people. So if you want to get feedback on something like that, approaching the person and saying, man, I like what you were covering the other day. It sounds like we got a lot of good stuff going on in your division or your work area and that type of thing. It's good stuff. Said I got distracted a little bit by seeming to get off topic once in a while.
Right.
I had to pull myself back in. Might be just something you need to be aware of.
Yep.
Sometimes you have to be a little bit more directive, a little bit more forceful. And again, that's usually best done when you have a legitimate position over a person, supervising them. It's tough if it's just colleague to colleague to say maybe you ought to try, or I don't think that looks as good.
I do want to get a little bit later and ask about from the employee side, receiving feedback and maybe even sharing feedback with one another. But let me throw out a situation, though. A lot of the examples we've talked about so far are ones where it's a good employee who does really good work. We've just got something we want to give them some feedback on to maybe enhance or improve one aspect.
Okay.
What about you got a really rotten employee that's just not getting it, and you are in a position where you need to be giving them some feedback? There's not always going to be that positive frame to put things in. I mean, any suggestions or tips on that, or is that just they're performing at the minimum standard they need to for the job, but they're not excelling. They're not performing at any level to where we want them to be. Obviously, you've got your performance review that may be 6-9 months down the road. What about stopping in their office and giving the feedback for those employees that just aren't really performing at all where we need them to be?
There are like 8 questions there. So
I know.
Take 1 or 2. All right. Suppose you got a patently bad employee, and you kind of mixed that up there because you said that they're doing the minimum standards of the job.
Well, I guess I say that because
minimum is doing the job,
right?
Which
and I guess my thinking is if they're below minimum standards, the hopes would be that they would be either let go or reprimanded somehow more formally. But if we're talking about more of this informal feedback, how do we need to approach that?
Well, I think in the informality of it probably is going to serve you real well here, because if a person's really screwing up, or they are bad in what they do, or they're really nowhere close to what you're expecting of them to be doing, they need to hear that from you quickly, concretely, and in no uncertain terms. They need to understand the meaning of your feedback. Okay. What you're basically doing is saying, look, and still positively approach by saying, I want you to work out in this organization. Yes. Or to be successful, in other words. But work out almost implies you may not. Right. But you can say, I want you to work out in this organization. I want you to be successful in what you're doing. But there's a lot of stuff in your way right now.
Okay. I like that phrasing a lot. Yeah.
And you need to know what those things are, because I know you can work on them to correct them. Yep. What you're really doing by saying that is it's on your shoulders, not mine. I got it off my shoulders when I'm telling you about it in a constructive way. Okay. But I'm giving you the responsibility and the accountability to say, do I want to change this or not? Okay.
So it's still that casual, I want to stop by and talk to you for a little bit, and I want to grab you when you have a moment, and it's still giving that feedback. But it sounds like this is a little more direct.
And more directive.
We're not couching it in the whole not matching your standard of quality type of thing. This is you've got some work to do. Yeah. But I think the positive framing you put on it, Ev, we want you to work out. We want you to be successful in this organization. There's just a lot of things in your way that we need to.
And you can even use more constructive, more directive terms. After you say, I want this to work out, we have a lot of high hopes for your performance here, but there's some things in the way. Yeah. You can say, what concerns me is, or what I see as your problems preventing you from being successful are. Okay. Those types of things. Sure. But you get nowhere by being generalized about things. You can't use generalized, fuzzy language. You can't go and say, Alan, man, I want you to be successful. Man, you're just not getting it, and I'll be, rooting for you from the sides, but man, let's get on with it, because I got nothing to work on. I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah. What do you do with, you need to do better? Yeah. I mean, what is your takeaway from that?
Or even attitude. I mean, oh man, what a bugaboo. I always encourage managers and directors and supervisors to never use the word attitude, because nobody knows what it means. All right? We all know it when we see it, positive and negative. But if you were to say to a person like, Alan, I need for you to improve your attitude around here. Right. It's really a problem for people. Your attitude's a problem. I can't legitimately expect that person to jump up and say, God, Tony, thank you so much for telling me that. I'm going to change my attitude tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock.
I'm going to be a whole different person. Perfect.
Right.
Thank you.
But what you're doing there, what you're doing there is attacking the person rather than the performance issues or the things that they're doing.
Well, that reminds me back, actually, I had a friend back in college, a girl that anytime somebody was down, or just upset about something, her whole thing was just cheer up. Cheer up. It's okay. It's all right. And I kept having to say, and finally I just at one point got to the point of saying, listen, telling me to cheer up doesn't do anything for me. I can't flip a switch and all of a sudden be happy. You've got to give me something to be happy about for me to cheer up. Otherwise, I am
a different way of looking at something,
right.
or a different way of approaching something.
Exactly. Give me something. So you're the same way. You're saying don't just say fix your attitude or get
concrete
better. Or
behaviors.
Right.
You have to behavioralize it and personalize it that way. But this girl at college, was that one of the girls you brought home for a weekend?
I don't really remember. There's so many.
I understand. If it was a cute little redhead, I remember. I mean, I would have skipped over that little bump.
It probably one of those girls. Yes. Another thing I think along the lines of the fuzzy language and not being very clear too is I think there's a lot of tendency that even if somebody is a very poor performer at that moment and they really need some quick feedback, they need some very detailed feedback, I think there's a lot of inclinations to still want to couch it in as much positive as possible. We're so happy you're here and you're doing, you seem to be catching on to things pretty well. There's just a couple things we want to work on and get, but otherwise you're doing great. I think there's a tendency for a lot of people to still feel like I've got to come away being nice to them and saying something good about their work, even if there's nothing good to say. And I do think I think the phrasing you put out there is the right ones. And I like that tone more. We just need to make sure people avoid feeling like they've got to always end on this big, uplifting, positive. Oh, but you're doing this great, and you dress really nice, so you got that going on for you. And
but let me tell you a different way to frame that. I like what I'm suggesting too. Okay,
good.
That's why I get the big bucks as a consultant. Right?
Absolutely.
No. There's a quote I like, and I've used it before on Leadership GPS, so it may sound familiar to some who are regular listeners. But the quote says, "The best gift you can give to someone you truly care about is direct, honest, candid feedback." Yep. Now think about that. Mm-hmm. You're already being positive with them because you're choosing to give them feedback.
That's right.
Well done.
Yes.
Now, feedback poorly done, or feedback because I want to stick it to you, or feedback because let's see if you can figure out why I'm doing this, that doesn't get it.
Well, that's not constructive feedback.
That's not constructive.
It's feedback, but it's not
feedback.
Constructive.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's like static on the microphone rather than reverberation.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a nice little pun there.
You're rolling with that. Keep it going.
That was real good.
Yeah.
The thing here is, I think that one thing you can say to a person, even if you've been very direct and very specific and very candid in your feedback about poor performance.
Right.
You give them all that they need to hear. I want you to be successful. There's a lot in your way right now that's keeping you from being successful. Specifically, I'm talking about boom, boom, boom.
Okay.
I really want you to consider doing this, okay? The positive things you can leave them with, which is not soppy positive, but it's real. It can simply say, and Alan, I have all the confidence in the world that you can pull this off.
Okay, that's good. Okay. Could you say something, too, about the company, we see a lot of potential in you. That's why we brought you in this organization. We're ready to see you live up to that potential that we know you're capable of. That type of messaging, right?
We're ready to see you move to that next level.
Yeah.
And here's what's going to be needed.
Okay.
Yeah. Here's,
obviously,
if you think about feedback, you're always talking about what to do more of or what to do less of.
Sure.
Okay. That's what you're really talking about.
Yeah.
And it's like looking in that mirror and seeing yourself the way others see you. Your job as a leader or a manager is to care enough about the people you're leading to say, I want you to be successful, and we see this in you, and we want to help bring that out and get over these hurdles.
Okay, great.
But to do that, you got to say what those hurdles are.
I've got a couple quick things I did want us to discuss here in a minute. I think I want to flip it around in just a moment and talk about employees, those who aren't in leadership positions, but those who are receiving the feedback, and maybe some ways to help with the receiving of that kind of feedback. We can talk about in just a moment, but really quick, let's throw out the contest code for those of you listening, trying to win an iPad. This is the last Leadership GPS where we're going to be posting a code because this whole thing ends at the end of March. Okay. So every episode on the Mesh that's posted between January 1st and March 31st is eligible. So we're here at the very tail end when this one comes out.
Right. This is a new iPad, right?
Yeah, I think, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
costs are all the same. Yeah, we'll do that.
I mean, it's not
we'll do a new
one or two, or it's a three. Basically, it's not a used one. Right?
It's one my 5-year-old's been playing with for 2.5 years, and but I think it'll be okay.
So it's beat up. Okay,
yeah, a little beat up, a little worn. No, it'll be a brand new one. Brand new.
Okay, good.
So the code for this episode is the word feedback, FEEDBACK, and the numbers 9988. Feedback 9988. That's the code for this episode.
Feedback can be in caps or small letters.
Either
matter
way,
what. Okay.
and not case sensitive.
Okay.
So, and we'll be back in just a moment after these quick break announcements.
This episode is brought to you by Drive Leadership, a leadership development and consulting service of the Jackson Group. Drive Leadership is a comprehensive process for preparing current and future leaders for active, results-oriented roles in rapidly changing organizations through the use of leader assessments, skills development sessions, individual or team coaching, and online reinforcement. To learn more about the Drive Leadership concept, visit its website at www.driveleadership.com.
And we're back with Leadership GPS. We are talking today about constructive feedback, not constructive criticism, as we decided to reframe that word a little bit very early on in the episode. So we've talked a lot about from the leader and the manager's role and their position about giving feedback to somebody and some do's and don'ts and some why it's important and some things to be careful about when you do it. But what about on the employee side? Let's say we've got some listeners here that are not in leadership positions. Maybe
Right.
one day they aspire to be, but yet they're in a position where they've got a leader giving them this constructive feedback. I'm going to imagine, because I think I know many of us deal with this all the time, sometimes it's difficult for us to even receive feedback. Even when a manager is trying their best to give us that good constructive feedback, sometimes it's a little tricky. I want to maybe talk about why is it difficult for employees? Why is it difficult for us as human beings sometimes to receive this feedback? And is there a different way we need to be approaching it and thinking about it to make it more beneficial for us?
Well, yeah, I think on the receiving end, if leaders and managers did feedback well, it wouldn't be difficult to receive.
Okay.
It wouldn't be. I mean,
So it really starts there.
it starts there. Poorly done, it hurts.
Yeah.
And we rub against, it's like rubbing against sandpaper,
And we've probably, as human beings for years, unfortunately, there's a lot of bad feedback out there that we've all become a little more accustomed to.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of employees in the workforce these days are a little more jaded toward it. They think, well, more of the feedback I've gotten has not been done very well. So obviously, if somebody's going to give me feedback, it's a bad thing.
The best, the ideal situation for a leader and a manager is to have a bunch of employees who ask for feedback. But it's also a wimp out situation for them to put it on the employee's shoulders to ask. Mm-hmm. In fact, sometimes it's nauseating to have an employee come and say, how am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing?
Yeah.
And that you don't want. But I know a lot of managers will say, that person's a great employee because they ask for feedback.
Sure.
Well, they shouldn't have to ask. They should be forthcoming all the time throughout the workday and throughout the work and everything like that. The problem with receiving it sometimes is that it's poorly given. Mm-hmm. It's given either routinely and rotely, like in evaluation times, and we know what to expect and we expect the worst. Mm-hmm. People will err in favor of thinking of the worst if they don't know how it's going to turn out. Okay,
right.
The other thing that we mess up with sometimes is the language, the verbiage that we use. If we can come in to people and say, man, I got to talk to you. I mean, I've been holding back and saying this a long time, but you got a real problem with such and such.
Oh, yeah. That's going to go over well.
So when a person gives a feedback out of exasperation or out of, I've had it up to here. I had a senior vice president tell me that one time, just recently. He was supposedly coaching which is a positive thing. Positive coaching means forward moving.
Sure.
He approached one of his vice presidents who really, I was coaching the guy as well, but he approached the guy by saying, man, I've had it up to here. You're working me to death. You just ringing me out. You're high maintenance.
Oh boy.
Here's what I need to tell you. And gosh, you've already wrung the guy out like a dish rag before you even get started.
Sure.
So I can't imagine anybody jumping up and down and said, thank you so much for that feedback that you just beat me over the head with.
Well, and it sets a precedent too, where a couple months down the road, that same situation occurs. Person walks in the doorway. Immediately, the defenses are going to be up on the employee side.
Yep.
Even if that manager does kind of regroup and present some feedback in a little bit better manner the next time,
Sure.
it's probably not going to be as still well received as it should be.
Sure.
Because of those past experiences.
Yep.
So we've got to battle against some of those earlier experiences that
Right.
some employees have faced.
Another mess up that we do that affects how employees receive feedback is that our timing and placement of the feedback. If we think that we're giving constructive feedback by jumping on somebody in front of others, that's not.
Right.
Okay. That's emotional outrage. And so this is where the emotional maturity of a leader or manager comes into play. They got to be strategic about their feedback process. They've got to know what they want to reinforce with that person. They got to know what they want to help redirect from that person's behaviors. That's strategy. You know, I think that every employee deserves a strategy from its manager or leader. And the fact is, I need to know if Joe is working for me, I need to know what I want to do with and for Joe to get him where I need for him to be.
Okay.
And where he wants to be.
Right.
Okay. You know, take the fact most employees want to do well in their job. Okay. And sometimes the leader and the manager's job is just to clear the junk out of the way. Well, lack of feedback about how they're doing is junk that needs to be cleared out. So we have to replace that with giving feedback, frequently done well. Okay. The best strategy for doing that is received by the employee best is impromptu feedback, rather than, again, the structured, routinized type of thing or out of emotion.
Not a scheduling a meeting 3 weeks in advance to give you feedback.
That's exactly right.
But also not storming down the hallway out of breath and walking in the doorway and just letting it unload.
But let's take an example. Suppose that you envision somebody's behavior, see something happening that shouldn't be happening. It reminds you that that's something the person's struggling with right now. To go to a person and say, Alan, you have a few minutes I can talk to you alone. Let's go in here in the office or whatever. Sure, it sets a tone like, okay, this is going to be something else. But then you can mute that tone by simply saying, boy, I'll tell you what, you know, you've got so much talent that we want to make use of here, but there's something that I was just reminded of outside when I saw this that's getting in your way. And I don't want you to hear it from me. I want you to hear it from me because I want you to be successful with this.
Right.
That's okay.
That's good.
That's meaningful stuff. The same time with the constructive, positive feedback. On the spot, spur of the moment, you know, just the surprise feedback. Going to a person and say, hey, Alan, I haven't told you this in a long time, and I should have. But, you know, I'm so impressed with what you're doing, this, and this, and this.
Yeah. Rather
than routinely walking through a work group and saying, hey, everybody, y'all doing great. Everybody's doing fine. Joe, great job. You know, that's Susie, right up there, baby. You know, on out the door.
Right.
That means nothing to people.
Sure.
So meaningfulness, intent rides well with the employee. But what can the employee do to receive it well? Okay, regardless if it's positive or negative.
Well, I'm going to think a couple of things are right offhand. I mean, employees need to try their hardest. And I know it's hard when their past experience maybe with a boss has been that they've always gotten the negative feedback. But going into a job, going into a new relationship with a new leader, manager, boss, understand that feedback is meant to be a tool to help you. That's its initial design. And I think employees need to remember that. It's not that somebody's just trying to exert their power over you all the time. They're not just trying to pick you apart to bring you down for some reason. In most cases, I think you even alluded to it before, leaders in general, for the most part, want to see their employees succeed.
They want to help. Yeah.
And so I think it's key for employees to just remember if a manager or boss or leader comes in and wants to talk to you and give you some feedback, if it's negative, if it's something you're doing wrong, something you need to improve, just remember in most cases, they're not there to belittle you. They're there to help build you up. And because they have a responsibility to the organization to see that organization succeed and be positive as well. Right. You're a piece of that puzzle, and they're trying to help you fit in with that. So,
absolutely. Yeah. I don't think if there's any way that an employee can say, well, I'm going to receive this feedback really well. It's critical or whatever it might be, or it might be positive, but either way. But how they respond can be very telling about how they think about it later. All right. I think there's going to be two levels of emotions about when you get feedback from somebody, positive or negative. One of which is the immediate emotion, how it hit me at the moment. Right. And then the later is the residual emotion. Right. Like, okay, after thinking about it, that was helpful. Sure. I know why they did that. You know, I might have done it poorly, whatever, but no problem. So the thing that I think the employee can do on the spot to a manager or a leader who's just given them feedback, be it critical or positive. You can say, I'm glad you told me that. I'm not sure it was easy to hear at the moment right now, and I need to think through it, but I do appreciate you taking the time to tell me that.
Absolutely.
Right? Show appreciation for it is the best response even though you're having to grit through your teeth sometimes, say, okay, yeah, okay. Not to say, yeah, I needed that. Thanks, I needed that. Or to say, well, that's your view, but I could see it differently, not to argue with it, but take it for what it was meant to be.
Yes.
This is helpful information. Should you use it that way?
Yep.
Then the person can respond and say, yeah, well, that was tough to hear, but I do appreciate you saying it.
I was going to say the appreciation of just that manager coming in and talking
right.
to you should be shown.
That's
because then
exactly
what
right.
you basically, if you built up a level of trust now with that leader to say, I'm going to be open to feedback when you give it to me.
Yep.
Now, like you said, you're not automatically saying you're right. That is something that's a problem for me, because I realize sometimes you've got to think about it and kind of process it a little bit.
Work it through.
But at least showing that appreciation that they at least came to you to give that feedback,
That's right.
I think is very important.
That's right.
Now, I would suggest at that point, as an employee, if you've thought through the feedback you've received, if you've got questions, if there's things that aren't clear, I would hope that the employee would take the effort to say, I want to make sure I understood what you explained to me. Clarify. I thought about it for the last day or so, and I had a couple questions. I just want to make sure I understood what it is you were telling me in that situation. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually great, and I think a lot of leaders would really like to see that happen. As long as it's not coming across as defensive, that I've written up in a response to every single thing you've said that I said you said I was doing wrong, and I want to rebut each one. That's generally not going to go too well.
Well, I think as leaders and managers, we need to expect that if we're giving negative feedback to people, there's going to be some negative emotional reaction of the moment. Accept that, plan for it, strategize about it, but say what you need to say clearly, distinctly. Don't leave any gaps. Make sure the person does understand, but then leave it alone for a while. But you know what? Rather than waiting for that employee to come back to you 2 days later and say, hey, thanks a lot, I really do appreciate that. They might, but that's not their obligation.
That's right. Yeah.
But our obligation as a leader or manager is to go back a couple days later. And it's a time thing. To go back and say, Alan, I gave you some feedback the other day about this, that, and the other. And I know that was tough to hear at the time. Can we talk about that for a moment and see how you're thinking about it now? That's a great mark of people wanting to make sure that the feedback was heard clearly. There's not residual collateral damage caused by it, that it was done well. Even ask the person, said, it's tough to give feedback like that. Did I do it in a way that came across the right way?
Sure.
Even get feedback like that. It's a great mark of people, but we rarely do it.
Well,
because most of the time when we get feedback, we want to think, okay, God, that's over with.
It's done. Check it off the list, move on.
That's right.
Well, by doing that follow-up, not only as a leader are you getting some good feedback yourself on how you gave the feedback to that employee, but if that employee does have any emotions that are still kind of a little unhinged from that encounter or some questions, it does give that opportunity to close the loop on some of those things. Because I think we've all dealt with situations where we have an immediate reaction to feedback we get. We think about it then after we get home that night, maybe the next morning. We may have some different opinions. We may be more accepting of it. By that leader coming back a few days later and closing that loop, you're able to sew that back together and answer any lingering questions and get a good reading on where that employee is with that feedback. Good.
I think, and we can do a whole session about this sometime, but remember, in complimenting or giving negative feedback, there's two realms that we can give feedback in, one of which is called conditional, and that's feedback given on things that have happened or not happened to the level that we expect them to be done. It's always based on performance. You did well, you didn't do well, that's a great report, that's a lousy report, whatever, but it's all predicated on something having happened. In other words, that feedback was earned by what the person did or didn't do. The other is called unconditional. Unconditional is relating to the person. That's when we have to be really careful. And I think it's very appropriate to compliment a person and to give feedback to the person as well as their performance in a workplace. I don't see any conflict with that at all. But to say to a person, I really like your being in this department. You add a breath of fresh air about everything. Your creativity just shines through. That's complimenting the person and who they are.
So it's more of their personality traits. And
it is. Not related to something they just did well. Okay.
Not a tangible thing, but more of what they bring to the role, what they kind of attitude, personality.
Not attitude.
Okay.
Not attitude. Because if I were to say, what's an example of unconditional positive feedback, it would be, I like you, or you're a nice person, or you're a creative person, or something complimenting what they bring with them. Okay?
Gotcha.
Not on what they've just done. An example of negative, unconditional feedback is something we never want to use. You never use.
That's just saying, I just don't like you?
Well, no. Well, that's one way of doing that. But you also, like the attitude thing, you got a lousy attitude, or to say, you stink. or to say you're a very abusive person.
Okay.
What you're doing is attacking the person. And again, I don't expect anybody to like being attacked as a person.
Sure.
You're attacking me, not what I've just done. If you attack what I've done poorly, I can change that. Mm-hmm. But you attack me, hey, I worked for 65 years on being who I am.
Right.
How dare you attack me like that?
Exactly.
So you never use that fourth quadrant, if you can imagine it was a quadrant. Conditional is positive and negative. Unconditional, positive, negative. You use a 3, but not the negative on the unconditional side.
Okay. Got it. I want to try to wrap up here in a few minutes, but I did want to see, were there some general tips or ideas or things we just want to make sure we leave with the audience about giving feedback or receiving feedback, constructive feedback, as we're using those terms now, that we want to make sure everybody hears and remembers?
Yep. I think let's deal with since we just talked about the employee receiving feedback, there's 3 things to keep in mind that I would suggest that employees. And again, nobody requires an employee to do these things.
All right.
Okay. There's no requirement.
Sure.
But if I want to come across as a thoughtful, success-minded employee to my leader or manager who's giving me feedback, first of all, as we said a moment ago, show appreciation for the fact that the leader took the time to give me the feedback.
It doesn't have to be appreciation for the specific thing that they are targeting, but it's appreciation for the idea of you giving to me to give me feedback.
You don't have to say, I liked what you're right on target. No, I disagree with anything. You just simply say, boy, I appreciate you giving me that feedback.
Yes.
All right. Second thing they need to do is think about it.
Yeah.
They need to process it out of the moment, if you will. And then the third part is the most logical. Get back to that person giving the feedback and reflect on it with them.
Sure.
And say, boy, the other day you talked to me about such and such. You know what? I think you're right on target with that. And here's some things I'd like to start doing, such and such.
Or, constructively saying,
yep, I disagree with that.
I have some disagreements, not to say that I think you're wrong with it, but I'd like to get more clarification or understand more where you're coming from with that.
So 3 parts for the employee.
Okay.
Appreciate, think about it or process it, and then get back to the person.
Back to them. Okay. And there again, not requirements.
That's right.
It doesn't mean that
employee doesn't have to do those things.
It doesn't mean that an employee is a bad employee if they don't do these things. It's just these are things that we know really help solidify that relationship between a leader and their employee.
Yep.
And also, I think, puts that employee in a better position in the future for their own leadership responsibilities.
Yep. Yeah. When it comes down to the person giving the feedback, be it leader or manager or colleague, we didn't talk about
true.
that.
Colleague,
employee, we didn't, and that's maybe another topic sometimes.
I think so, yes.
But 4 things. Personalize it.
Okay.
I'm going to read through them first. Personalize it, describe it, give meaning to it, and then suggest.
Okay.
All right. Personalize it how? I think the person giving the feedback, good eye contact, looking at the person as you talk to them, and using their name. That's what I'm talking about there. Why?
Okay.
Because they know that you are meaning it for them, that you are responding to them rather than, okay, I got to read you this evaluation form, that type of thing.
Okay.
Describe it. That's where you get specific. There's something you need to hear from me. What's getting your way is, and not generalize it about your attitude. Boy, let's just get on track. Let's ramp it up a bit. No, those are broad categories. Nobody don't know what to do with.
They don't tell you anything.
What do you mean ramp it up? I'm already up the top of the ramp. I don't know what you're talking about. So describe it in very behavioral terms.
Okay.
Third is give it meaning. Why is it important that they correct that or continue doing that if it's positive or negative? Why is it important? To say to a person who's that graphic designer again looking over their shoulder and say, man, that just really pops out. Then even just simply saying, you know what, the client is going to just go crazy over that. Right. That's really getting what they wanted, I think. Yep. That's giving it meaning. Okay. Sure. Why to be good at something. And then if it's on the negative side particularly, the person giving the feedback should always suggest alternatives. And it's okay sometimes to personalize it. They can say things like, what I really want you to do is, or what I would really like to see is, or they can neutralize it and say, you know what, have you thought about this? Here's another approach you might want to take with that, or here's something to think about with this, or no, that's not going to work.
Okay.
I need for you to do such and such.
All right.
Maybe it's directive or not. But 4 parts, and that was personalize, describe, give meaning, and suggest.
All right. So those 4 things, that's for the leaders giving feedback or people giving feedback to one another. Yep. The more of those we can include in that feedback, it becomes a much more successful process.
Yep.
But then there is a little bit of opportunity on the employee side or person receiving the feedback to also respond back. And really, if both sides work together this way, in this perfect world where you've drawn out these ideas, and if both the person giving the feedback and the one receiving are able to implement these ideas, you've got a very harmonious relationship where people are willing to give feedback to each other. It's only going to benefit the organization. It's only going to strengthen that team. It's a good move for everybody.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah.
So,
well, Alan, I think, and very specifically, I think you've done a magnificent job of facilitating this dialogue this morning.
Oh.
And that's really important because I think our listeners appreciate that type of lacing together the thoughts that you've done. And the only thing I would suggest, to make it even better, is tell me how great I am. Okay.
Well,
that's my type of feedback.
Tony, first off, I appreciate this feedback. Honestly, I really do. I appreciate you taking the time at the end of this recording to tell me this, and I'm going to think about it a little bit tonight, and I'd love to follow back up with you maybe in another day or two, and we can talk about and see
Helen, I think that would be great.
How that recording went. So, and
I'll look at you as he's a better facilitator at that point.
That's great. Good information, good topic, and again, something that I see a theme in a lot of our episodes that some of these things are real challenges for leaders because some of these things just don't always come natural.
Sure,
and it is having to step outside of your comfort zone sometimes to do this, but we do know through our employee surveys, through your leadership development work and everything, that employees need, want, desire feedback.
Yep.
And it needs to be ongoing. It needs to be as needed and not forced into a process.
Yep.
And that's what keeps employees engaged with an organization, keeps them engaged with what they're doing.
That's right.
And plus it makes that leader a stronger leader if they are able to give that kind of feedback in a very open format.
And it helps the organization achieve what it's supposed to be achieving
That's
as
right.
well. Yeah, absolutely. And you're right when you say these are difficult things. We said all along, leaders do abnormal things.
That's right.
But they do them well.
Yeah. Great.
Okay.
Well, before we wrap up, let me just throw out a few housekeeping information here for anybody who'd like to contact us or find out how to be talking to us about future episodes or ideas or questions you may have. We have several ways you can be reaching us. Of course, you can always go to the website, which is www.themesh, that's THEMESH.TV. From there, there's a contact us page where you can fill out a short form. Let us know if you have a question, idea, comment, suggestion, or anything on any of the shows that we're posting up here. You can also send us an email at info@themesh.tv. And if you really want to just talk and give us some verbal feedback, we'd love to hear you through our voicemail system. You can call the Mesh line at 828-619-0048. When you call, you'll be prompted to leave a voice message. Just let us know that you're leaving a message for Leadership GPS. Tell us your question, your thought, your idea, maybe suggestions for future episodes. We'd love to hear those. And who knows, we may even be able to play some of these future recordings in a future episode. So with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of Leadership GPS. Dad, thanks for your time as always.
Thank you, son. It's been a pleasure.
Good. And we'll look forward to talking to everybody next time. Take care.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.